Well, 4 years ago, I was on vacation. I was visiting with my mom and my sister and her family back in my original hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And as a result of that vacation, I was not here on the Sunday after the 2016 election. And I remember reconnecting with many of you when I was back and listening to so many of you as you shared a wide variety of emotions relative to how you felt about the outcome of that election in 2016. And so realizing that emotions surrounding this year's election processes would likely be a bit heightened as well, I made sure that I didn't schedule a vacation for this Sunday. And I also just chose to try to do a lesson that would shine a light in one way or another on our emotions, on our feelings. And I also felt that it might be a good Sunday to also share a little bit of that light onto one of our core values here at the ministry, and that's the core value of integrity. And I had that thought in my mind as it pertained to this Sunday after election. But my oh my, has this year provided us with so much more than an election to help us become more deeply aware of our emotions, become more aware of our feelings. There has been so much more that has asked us to ask ourselves about what standing in integrity means, and then how we go about expressing that. I mean, we think about all that has come our way this year, right now, an uncontrolled, pandemic, which has resulted in a lot of loss, a lot of grief, loss of just our normal way of doing what used to be our normal way of easily going about our day-to-day business, the loss of the in-person, physical, connections that perhaps, some of us took more for granted than we realized before the pandemic entered. And we've had emotions arise out of loss of jobs and concerns about our economy, businesses closing, churches closing. Now, for both of them, some now having become permanent closures. We've seen the protests in the streets because of the civil and social unrest. There have been, pockets, of violence and destruction and death, connected in some way with those. And then, of course, there's just everyday challenges that have come into our lives on an individual basis that are no less significant, for us. But I think that most telling of all, that through all of it, we've arrived at a place where I think the numbers actually of associated with the election results, can't be unseen. And it's just such a very clear visual of how clearly divided we have become as a people in this country. So emotions have been running high, and integrity, of people, of processes, of institutions has been called into question. And yet here we are. Here we are. Our campus may be closed, but our church, which is you and me, has never closed. Here we are, perhaps a bit battered and bruised, but we are still standing. We are still gathering. We are still joyfully celebrating each other and something in our lives that is so much bigger than any of us on our own. Here we are, still embracing the opportunity to keep exploring new depths of who we are and who we want to be. And so this morning, I'm going to try to just kind of weave all of those threads that are present, in our lives into a tapestry that depicts the honoring of our feelings and our emotions, that depicts a pathway of integrity, and also points out the importance of spirituality and its practice as a foundational touchstone. Another way to say that would be in the words of Sister Joan Chittister, who recently wrote that as a people, we are at a crossover moment. It is a call to all of us to be our best, our least superficial, and our most serious about what it means to be a Christian as well as a citizen. And so let's start with being our best as it applies to our emotions. What might a measure of that be? Well, there was one offered by author Elizabeth Gilbert, ironically, in an article she wrote 4 years ago at this time. And it was to determine if we are legitimizing our emotions. That's how we are the best with our emotions. We determine if we are legitimizing them or not. And so, when do we delegitimize them? Well, we do so when we believe that our feelings and emotions are wrong, that they're just wrong. And they could be wrong for any number of reasons. They could be wrong because someone's told us you shouldn't feel that way. They could be wrong because of a quote unquote social standard that says that you should feel a different emotion than the one you say you are. They're wrong when we start to embrace that we should feel, or I'm sorry, that we think we should feel one way instead of how we actually feel in truth. And so all of these wrong connotations, they come down to our not being able to accept our true feelings as being legitimate. Instead, we start to believe that because our true feelings don't fit into some social standard or align with someone else's opinion, then there must be something wrong with us. But of course, that's not true. In truth, just as there is uniqueness and complexities within each of us as individuals that we are, there is not only one right way to feel about anything in any given situation. I mean, some people get married and they don't want to have children. That's how they feel. Well, my family system had a standard that said quite the opposite of that. Some people graduate from high school. They've got this fantastic resume. They got high GPAs all the way around, and they don't feel like going to college. They're not drawn to it. And that's a decision that doesn't often comply, with high school or family or peer or social standards. Some people watch a loved one die and they feel joy. They feel joy because that person is free. That person is finally free after having traveled a very long, hard, arduous, painful journey. And many would call that the wrong emotion. When I started to have issues, I guess, or questions with my affiliation, longtime affiliation with the Catholic Church, I started to see how this delegitimizing can happen. See, I'd made an appointment to go visit with one of the priests at my church to talk about what was moving in me, the questions I had, the feelings I was feeling, and ask for his guidance, ask for his counsel. And so I went and I shared the questions I had. I told him how I was feeling and how uncomfortable those feelings were because Catholicism was the only faith tradition, faith system I had ever known. And when I was done speaking with him, he looked me right in the eye and he said, "You shouldn't feel that way." I went home and told my then husband that, I talked with Father so and so, and all he said was basically, "Don't feel that way." And his response to me was, "Well, don't. I don't feel that way." About 2 weeks later, I went to Mass. And that, for what I can't remember why, but I went by myself that Sunday. And in the midst of the sermon being given by another priest who was a member of the staff at that church, he began to speak about the Catholic faith and its teachings and traditions as compared to other religions in the world. And while holding his hand out flat in front of him, kind of like this, he said, "They are pizza." And then while raising his hand to a level as high as his arm would extend, he then said, "We are pizza supreme." I immediately stood up and walked out. And that literal step became the first of many subsequent steps of varying kinds that I would begin to take so that I could learn how to legitimize my emotions, how I could learn to stop delegitimizing my emotions and my feelings, learn how to make my life choices that would be in alignment with my true feelings. Legitimize your emotions. Be your best. Sister Jones' next point in this current crossover moment she believes that we are in referenced our being our least superficial. Least superficial. So what does that mean as we apply it to our emotions? Well, in Elizabeth Gilbert's article, she spoke personally about this, and she shared that in her experience, we go below the superficial layer of our emotions in order to question and to get in touch with our reactions to life. For example, for many years before I sat down and visited with my priest, I had learned how to bury my feelings. I had learned how to turn them off and ignore them. And there were experiences in my life where I would ask questions and be told that it wasn't mine to ask. And these were questions about God, about religion, sometimes about my health. They were about conversations that I overheard friends or family members having that didn't feel quite right. The words they were using, the issues they were talking about, topics that again I was told I would not understand. And it can become exhausting to just sit and constantly receive this energy of being told directly with words or through behaviors that, my questions don't matter. My questions don't matter. And for me, and I think for many other people, that kind of exhaustion can easily turn into, okay, whatever, that must mean that I don't matter. Unless, of course, I would begin to be like others and think like others, feel how others did or how they thought I should. And I did those things for a lot of years until that fateful day when my priest ticked me off and blew the lid off of everything that I had buried. It laid bare all that was for me to examine, all of those valid questions, all of those real feelings that were for me to name and to claim and to honor and to own, and to do so at a much deeper level of authenticity and in integrity with who I really was. And I have to say that if he were here today, if my priest, my former priest, were here today, I would very seriously and very sincerely thank him. I would thank him from the bottom of my heart for telling me how I shouldn't have been feeling that day when I sat in his office, because it put me on a very wonderful path forward in my life. So let's take a moment, because I know that many of you, have had a host of various feelings and emotions just as this particular year has unfolded. You've been wonderfully vulnerable, very open, as you have shared some of them very freely in our times of fellowship after our Sunday services. Last week, oh my gosh, several of you shared so beautifully as you created our very special Sabbath day celebration service. Some have also shared that sometimes it's been hard not to react in ways that aren't really in alignment with who you are. That true you that rests below that surface level, below that more superficial level of our expressions and reactions. And I think all of this is just a wonderful awareness for you of all of this whole idea of honoring your feelings and reactions as being real and valid, and being able to recognize those times where maybe you do want to do some deeper inner work around a particular reaction. And so I encourage everyone just to give yourself time. Give time to yourself as we continue moving through the rest of this year and whatever may lie in our future as we look ahead to a new year. Knowing that there may be some triggers that will tick you off one time or another. Consider taking Ms. Gilbert up on an invitation that she included in her article to you, and that is an invitation to fearlessly examine your own reactions to your own lives. Fearlessly examine them. Many times we start to ask ourselves questions about ourselves, about, what we've said or done or what we felt or not felt. We can start getting into that very No, it's just not a good place to go, but it's where we inflict upon ourselves guilt and shame and judgment, and we get close to or actually go into that rabbit hole of beating ourselves up because we start believing that how we are feeling is wrong. We start to grab hold of that idea that there is only one normal way in which we are supposed to feel, and that there's no room to deviate from that. But boy, there's just something so much better to grab onto and to hold on to with white knuckles if you have to. And it's the lesson. It's the lesson, however it gets taught for you, a lesson as to how to feel what we are feeling. We need to learn sometimes how to feel our feelings, not the way we're supposed to feel, but what we actually feel. See, that road of actuality, that's the path that leads us to be the least superficial in our lives, which I think right now is of paramount importance in these days and times. And walking that path is also what brings us to embody and be a model of Sister Joan's last call of this crossover moment, that of being a Christian as well as a citizen. Now, comparing that to Ms. Gilbert's article, her words, she describes that as just live your absolute truth. Live your absolute truth. So as it relates to our feelings and our emotions, this is all about one of the most important lessons that Jesus lived and that he tried to teach to us. See, when you talk about being a Christian and being a citizen of the world, he was such an example of integrating the social with the spiritual. And he did it while never seeing anyone as the other, never the other. He always operated from a belief in the oneness that we share with one another. Sister Joan, she calls that one-ing, one ing. There was always absolute truth in Jesus's teachings to everybody. And today, it is hard at times to envision that in the midst of the current polarization and the serious divide that we are all well aware of in our country. But Sister Joan encourages us to hold on to that spiritual truth as our guide, to hold on to spiritual truth, truth that can be found and used as a foundation, scriptural words that say, love one another as I have loved you. Love one another as I have loved you. She says, use those words as a foundation of national respect, to use those words of love to set a standard for national discernment, to use those words as the bedrock for both our personal relationships and for a civilized society. In the same spirit that Miss Gilbert wrote of our emotions 4 years ago, Sister Joan wrote this past Wednesday morning, the day after our elections closed. She said, to be one, we don't need one party, one program, one set of policies. What we need is one heart for the world at large, a single-minded commitment to this more perfect union, and one national soul large enough to listen to one another for the sake of the planet, for the sake of us all. So where can we look for one-ing? Only within the confines of our own hearts. Only in the confines of our own hearts. Feel what you feel. Allow your emotions to be legitimate. Fearlessly examine your own reactions to your own life and live your absolute truth. As far as Elizabeth Gilbert is concerned, she says those things, she says there's no other pathway to integrity than that. As far as the church is concerned, integrity is a very intentional pathway. As I've said, it's one of our core values right now, and one that you, the congregation, were very clear about wanting to see modeled by the church. Now, as an organization, we absolutely hold this value as sacred. But as I mentioned earlier, the true church is you and me. And that's why, when all of our core values were established, we included behavioral statements in support of them. Statements that apply to the organizations and statements that apply to each of us as individuals. And I'm sure many of you have seen those statements. You've been given copies of our core value cards several times over the last several years. They're always available in the brochure rack at the church right now. And so as you think about stepping out onto your path of integrity in the context offered by Ms. Gilbert, and walking that path in ways that embody the oneness and model the love that was embodied and modeled by Jesus, the same oneness and love that is consistent and present in the confines of your own hearts. Just stay alert for those behavioral markers, those affirmative reminders that our core value of integrity offers. Because the first one says that I make decisions that are grounded in prayer. The second one says that I offer my opinions, I offer my perspectives while remaining open to additional points of view. And lastly, our integrity tells us that I resolve disagreements by speaking lovingly and directly with those with whom I have conflict. You follow those markers. You hold those affirmations within the confines of your heart, and you will draw out the best in others. And you will draw out the best in others in all situations, in every single circumstance, because you will be an exemplar yourself. God bless you.